So thanks, welcome everyone to the second webinar we have in this new format, Buynomics.Talks, where we talk to specific experts from the field. And today I'm super happy that I can welcome Ulrik. I think we've known each other from the very beginning. I think you sent us an email pretty much like the first, second, or third week after we founded Buynomics. And we've been in contact ever since, done a number of projects together, I would say. I value very much your expertise in the field, and that's why I thought it's a good idea to have you as a partner in our webinar on B2B SaaS. I would say in pricing, I'm more like a duck. Like I'm okay in everything. I can swim a little, walk a little, fly a little, but nothing really well. And you're really an expert in one area, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Maybe just very briefly before we get into, and then I'll hand over to you, just get this out of the way. So again, I'm a co-founder of Buynomics. For those who haven't met or seen us yet, founded the company, worked, as I said, all my life in pricing. And the company that we founded is Buynomics. Buynomics is essentially a SaaS solution, which makes the topic of this webinar double interesting for me. We are ourselves in the target group, so we offer a SaaS solution to B2B clients and essentially helps our customers make better pricing and revenue management decisions. It really predicts with high accuracy what happens if you change your price or if you change something in your portfolio. For example, if you have a good, better, best portfolio, if you change something in the middle option, in the better option, it also tells you how it affects sales of the other options. So it gives you really transparency on what you do. And typically, if you have this transparency, it allows you to make much more profitable decisions. And this is what we offer our users in, for example, CPG, telco, and also software industries. If you're interested, please reach out after the webinar. We're always open, and I think so will be Ulrik. And with this, I'll hand over to Ulrik for your introduction. I think the core ideas and the core of the project is you wrote a book on B2B SaaS pricing. And I think this is essentially what we'll use today as the core of our industry. From my understanding, we have lots of people also in the webinar from the field who are interested in the topic. And I think it really would be interesting for everyone to understand what are the core challenges of everything. We'll go a bit through the topic. Of course, I'll also ask a number of specific questions that interest me. Maybe with some relevance for us at Buynomics as well. And I think that's how we'll do the talk. For all the participants, if you have any questions, just write them into the chat and we'll try to answer them towards the end. I'll keep the time. I think because Ulrik, you said you have a hard stop at 3:30, so we'll manage everything before then. And with that, I'll hand over to you. Maybe just a little bit of introduction on your background. And what was the motivation to write a book on B2B SaaS pricing?
Yeah, so thank you. So I sometimes joke that I was the first visitor to your website, I think 5 years ago, whenever it was. I think this was, I wrote a book on pricing psychology back in 2017. I got invited to co-write a book, and then I wasn't an advisor or an expert at that point in time. I'd been a business owner. I started and sold 3 businesses. And then okay, I had a sort of break after my last business, and I co-wrote this book with another author. And then the market sort of pulled the advisory service out of me, because whenever I'd given a talk, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, can you help with my pricing?" And then I agreed, and that's how I sort of got into what I do today. And then the second book that just came out, I think primarily I wrote it for my own sake. I think writing a book to me is a really good way to just structure my thinking and just figure out what I actually mean with with some design concepts or how I actually evaluate these things. So that was the primary motivation. I guess the secondary motivation was that I could tell that there was a lot of let's say demand in the very early stage startup environment, and also sort of inside corporate offices where they have sort of products, that I would never be able to sort of meet that demand. So I think, okay, let me give them a resource that could get people started, and then maybe the world is better off.
Mm. Interesting, very, very good. So you give advice when I have your book here, really interesting read. You give the initial advice, don't talk to anyone about a book you haven't written.
True.
Well, why is that? Because I was just going to do that.
No, so it's because I announced that I was going to publish a book, and then I got busy doing other things, and then for 2 years, like, people were asking me, "Oh, when's the book coming out?" And I was like, "Yeah, soon." So I kept sort of pushing it off, and then finally I got around to actually sort of finishing it. So I think if I write another book, I'm going to sort of announce it when it's written, and I sort of have a publication sort of all mapped out and so forth. So I think it took me a little bit by surprise how long the process was for this one.
But I think it's good motivation, right? If you tell everyone, then you actually have to do it at some point.
Also true, yeah. So I have a few people to thank, and I think actually some of them I thank in the foreword, that like if they hadn't kept bugging me, I don't think the book would have ever come out. Yeah, so that's just how it is.
Perfect. So let's dig in a little bit, maybe just to get started. So when I read it, so the initial example is about a railroad case, and I think so you explain pricing for railroads, and I'll hand over to you in 2 sentences. Which, like, initially is not obvious why railroad pricing and SaaS pricing have similarities. One is very heavy in equipment, I would say. The other one's ideally not. So what are the similarities, and what are the learnings and we can take from this initial example that you use?
So I think I was looking for some example to sort of explain some of the dynamics of price discrimination across different customers, right? And one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of software is that, maybe especially in sales departments, is that there's this idea that the margin is 100%. So we can sell at any price, and that is profit. So let's just get more customers at any price, sometimes at any cost, sort of from a sales perspective, and then we'll just grow that way. And in that respect, it's similar to the railroad in that we have a big upfront investment to build the thing, and then transporting the individual customer or passenger is close to zero. And that creates a different or specific dynamic inside a company of what it then means to be profitable and grow. So that was sort of the origin of the train example. Also, it illustrates a lot of other design concepts quite well. So I use it to say, well, if we're trying to price the train, then we can price it at $1 and it's 100% profit, or we could price it at $100 and it's 100% profit because, like, let's say the incremental cost is close to zero. So what we should instead look at, instead of trying to price the train, is actually to price the customer. So this is sort of the first sort of concept that I've revolved my thinking around, is that people are usually trying to ask the wrong question. They're trying to say, well, what should my software cost? Instead of asking, well, what should the customer be willing to pay that is using my software for a specific solution or specific end, which is a much more fruitful and answerable question than the first one.
Yeah, but if we just look from pricing perspective, essentially what in the railroad example as well as in the SaaS example is essentially if you have zero variable cost, you are essentially maximizing revenue, which is then the same as maximizing profit, right?
Yeah.
So you could simplify. So in the profit optimum, it depends on the margin, and in the revenue optimum, you have it when it's like price elasticity is -1. So it's just a special case of a case where you have variable costs, right? It's just variable cost is 0.
Sure, and then so and I think one of the things I see in software is sometimes that even though the variable cost isn't zero right now, a lot of people have this fantasy, a dream that it will be in the future, right? If we just grow big enough. So scale will solve it for us. So the margins increase as we grow for sort of because of various dynamics. So that sort of myth often exists inside sort of technology growth companies. So also sort of one of the other concepts I use trains to describe is that for me, price discrimination, meaning that we price the customer, not the product, and we try to price different customers differently. We have sort of mainly two larger toolboxes. And one is packaging. So that is where we sell a first-class ticket and a second-class ticket and so forth. And the other is the pricing architecture where we price per mile or per station or whatever it is. So we have some sort of a metric-based pricing where we count something and then price per unit in that respect. And essentially that sort of one-to-one, let's say, maps onto that's at least sort of basic software pricing.
Yeah, and I think there are two more analogies that are, I think, interesting. Is one with the train. So let's say you're in America, you're about to build the first train lines from like the East Coast to the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So you know that transportation is a thing. So people ride on their horses to the West, very simplified. But you don't know if this is really a mass market, right? So and that's similar to many software cases where you know, okay, I'm solving a problem that currently people are doing by hand in somewhere, right? So let's say I want to automate email sending, people send emails, so it's a thing, but I don't know what's like in the end the actual demand function for my product. So right, so I know that there's like a rough need, but I'm not 100% sure if there is a demand function and what that demand function is, because that's the second analogy is if you go from like individual transport to railroad, you turn it into something much smaller into a mass market, right? And the hypothesis is that this scaling in the end results in something very new and somewhat different, right? So you go from individual transport to a mass market because it's so much cheaper. You can also you do trips you wouldn't otherwise do, right?
Sure, and I think, I mean, well, a lot of markets are created because cost-driven growth.
So there's some initial leap of faith, sort of like when you start, and I think that's an important first phase for startup. It seems to me, like also having gone through the experience myself, the initial question is not so what's like the right price. The first question is, do I actually have a demand function in what I do? And then what does it look like? And then how do I monetize on it? What's your...
Yeah, and actually sort of what I see a lot of startups, the reason why a lot of startups fail, and startups can also be sort of corporate enterprises or corporate products, is that they correctly identify a pain or problem, but they miss the fact that there actually is no demand to solve that pain or problem. Mm. So you can have a huge pain that just isn't being chased by money for whatever reason, right? So, and this distinction is crucial in determining whether you will actually have product market fit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I usually sort of use sort of just like the major test, which is, are someone already having activity, like spending time and money and budget and resources, specifically trying to solve this job that your solution sort of offers into the market. And if there isn't, then, you know, maybe it's just a pain that isn't really sort of that high on the priority list of anyone, right? Yeah. But if there is budget, then you can sort of redirect that money over to you. So sometimes I say, so you know the word of like call to action. So if you have a call to action, then maybe you have a problem. And I'd rather have a call the action, meaning that the action, the impetus, the direction should already be in the market. Like there should already be search and demand, and you can then sort of just pull that into your product rather than trying to generate it out there.
Yeah. What would be, give any good examples of like cases where this didn't work? So there was, you would say, demand, but not really people willing to pay for the product of a startup.
So I had a pretty young team at one point. They designed an app to solve mental health issues for college students. So young people go to college, they arrive at a college, just left all their friends, they left their hometown, so they're alone. They are, they lack a social network. They feel depressed. They are overworked by college. So they said, well, this is a big pain. Universities recognized it as a big pain. There was drop off. There was like suicide, like all kinds of issues. You could quantify it in sort of lost curriculum years and so forth. So it turned out to sort of be a $1 billion opportunity in that sense. They had developed an MVP for the app, which was an app that generated meaningful conversations between students. So you'd sit in front of someone, you put the phone on the table, you press it, and it give you a topic, and you talk about it. They had run pilots, they had raving reviews, they had all the different things. Universities loved it, and they didn't sell anything, right? Because students have that problem. They feel alone, but they solve it with Tinder and beer. Like they don't want to solve it with a conversation app because I don't know, it's awkward and they're just looking elsewhere. So I mean, it's a crude example, but I see this sort of replicated a lot of other places. If we take a completely different example, I was helping a European corporate doing traffic simulation software that they were selling into municipalities. And municipalities do want traffic simulation software, so they do need to sort of plan new roads and intersections and all the things. But really, it just turned out to be a nice to have, because they actually aren't sophisticated enough to do it, and they sort of have a pretty good idea of where they want to place new roads. They don't need the traffic simulation, right? So for them, it was just a toy and not a critical tool.
Okay, yeah. In hindsight, these are always easy. The really difficult part is like seeing this beforehand, what makes sense and what wouldn't, right? That's the task of the founder. Okay, so let's say maybe let's move a little bit, a couple of years forward. So we know there's a demand function. We don't really know what it looks like, but we're pretty sure we have a business. What's next? Or first of all, when do you think, in your experience, when is that moment? Is it, for example, our Buynomics, we just are past our Series A, moving to a Series B? It feels like this is a time, and we're already, of course, it's our topic, but we're already moving, professionalizing, I would say, our pricing, our own pricing. What's typically like the right moment to do it? And then, of course, the big question, what should companies do, just as an outline?
So I think generally you want to realize that the money is not in the price point. So whether you charge 10 or 12, that's rarely the issue. The money is actually in the structure. So the money is in your ability to identify that you have a first, second, and third class in your train, or so this is the packages or the modules or the add-ons that you specify and sell. This is sort of where a lot of the value is generated, because that's where it's communicated and bought from the customer side. And then your ability to pick good pricing metrics that actually probably monetize the value that's being delivered and does not slow down adoption of the product within the customer's organization. So let me give an example. If you charge per user, then the customer is inclined to add less users simply because they have to pay whenever they add a user.
Yeah.
And maybe for your software, having the most users in the organization is what is going to generate the most usage. And maybe the usage is what you're after to reach some sort of critical mass or critical adoption point, right? So this is what I often see sort of in these sort of two stages with startups, is that either they actually don't know what they're selling, and we need to identify these jobs to be done and create really good packaging around that to communicate the value. So if we don't have that, then that's the first thing that we fix. But if they do have good packages, then we go to the pricing metric and say, hey, do we have a really sort of fair and valuable pricing metric that we can then streamline value through? So value generated with the customer equals payment to us, and then everyone is happy. And then sometimes that's where we need to fix it on sort of the the pricing architecture point of view.
And architecture, you mean first the metric? Is it like the number of seats, or is it the number of, I don't know, use cases, or?
Yeah, so this could be something like, oh, we want to have a flat fee for this, and then we want to price per user, and we want to price per whatever API call or model or whatever we do, right? So this can generate, let's say you have a customer portfolio of 500 customers, and you use a specific pricing architecture where you run pricing through these different metrics. Maybe you have different discount thresholds and so forth, that then generates pricing for these 500 customers. You want the model without the need for a sales rep to go in and sort of adjust it manually. You want the model to generate sort of good pricing that is pretty close to what you think the customer is willing to pay without the need for that sort of manual adjustment.
Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, essentially the metrics. I think in some cases it's fairly natural. I don't know, something like Slack, you charge the number of seats and so on. And in some cases it's a bit more difficult, right?
Yeah, and you can see with Slack, for example, what they did was their real growth came when they changed from seats license to monthly active users. So that would be licenses that have actively done something in Slack for the past 30 days. Because that moved the value generation sort of back a step into from the customer's perspective to, oh, I can just give everybody a login and that's free. And only when they use it, hence save meeting times, do I pay. Great, let's do that. And then that's when they got mass adoption.
Yeah.
Since then, they've actually rolled it back a little bit and said, well, now we're also going to price per interaction and so forth. So you have a maturity in sort of the timeline of Slack where they're sort of moving across, and now they're just charging you per employee. So now they're back to a license-based model, but they couldn't have done that to begin with because nobody believed that Slack would work. So they needed to get in with that sort of low entry where people could give everybody in the organization a login, but not pay until the value had actually been proven.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's the first thing, identifying the metric, and then what's next? The next big, is it finding the price points, or is it first like identifying the packages, good, better, best, or something? So
usually I always do packaging first.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't know what you're pricing, then you shouldn't price it, right? So packaging comes first. So you need to sort of identify your first, second, and third class. And if you're a train, you maybe also want to identify whether you do passenger or passenger and freight, like very different things, right? So just earlier today, I was working with a localization company, and we're doing fencing across language service providers on one end, and on the other end, we're doing direct sort of end consumer pricing. So it's a way to separate the market. Then we figure out what kind of packaging we have, and then pricing metrics and so forth. And then finally, you do price points as the last thing.
And how do you do it? So you already said it doesn't really matter if it's 10 to 12. I would be so certain about this in general, but how do you do it? How do you know if 10 or 12 is? Often I feel that people think the person who knows the highest numbers knows best, but that of course isn't true, right? So there's not, the highest price isn't the best, but the right price is the best. And the question is, how do we find the right price? So
you can set, usually I say that until you're at around, let's say $100 million ARR, you shouldn't worry about price optimization. You should just do what I call price positioning, which means that you generally sort of want to move your price in bigger chunks, like chunks of at least 20%. Because you're going to have a really hard, especially in B2B, where you don't have presumably thousands and thousands of customers. And even if you have thousands, you only have a few thousand, you don't have tens of thousands of customers. So you're not going to get a reliable data set or reliable stream of customers that really allow you to do any kind of detailed optimization work anyways. Because even if you get a couple of hundred customers a year, they're spread across different packages and so forth. So do price positioning, sort of figure out if you want to be sort of materially above or below different competitors of where you are. And then sort of, that's where you are. If it works out, then you can raise prices, but do it in sort of bigger chunks. But the most material increases I've done in price have come from adjusting the model, adjusting the packaging, and adjusting the pricing metrics we have. So I did a review recently of the last 25 projects I've done. And these are on, I think, a median value, product value of around between 7 to 8 million euros ARR on these products. And the average price increase we executed on this was plus 242%. And this, of course, isn't because we're doing optimization work or asking people in a survey what they're willing to pay, but because we're materially shifting the value in the product structure and materially sort of shifting around the pricing architecture. Okay.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, if you have a growing product, you're adding features, so there are always ways in which you can like introduce new products and use them also for price changes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes SaaS products unique, is that you don't know what you're going to sell your customer in 2 years from now, because the product will have moved, right? So you need, that's also from a contract framework perspective, you need to enable yourself to change pricing as your product develops.
Yeah.
And then sort of reprice customers on an ongoing basis. Doesn't mean that you need to sort of hike prices all the time, but the ability to do so becomes a major sort of part of your agility and ability to grow.
Yeah. What's your view on, because that's always a topic that's difficult and where people have very different opinions, price increases for existing customers. I mean, if you're a fast growing SaaS company, existing customers become sort of less important in the sense that if you double sales every year, then you have half of your customers are new, and then after 2 years, 3 quarters are new. So the initial customers become less important, but still it's often a very controversial topic, and I've heard
what legacy customers usually create is they create organizational drag. So they create technical debt, and they actually also create what I call commercial debt, which is the inability for sales and customer success to handle all customers the same, because some have different plans and different sort of product configurations and so forth. So this is actually sort of around a Series B. Often we see growth slow down because a lot of internal resources from sales and so forth actually spend sort of maintaining legacy customers instead of just having everyone sort of in a scalable model. Okay. Yeah. But the way you change pricing for new or existing customers is, or the way I usually do it is, I create a new design framework for packaging and pricing. And then we do the validation and we do all the work that's necessary. And then we sales test it with new customers. And then we run a sales cycle, maybe 2 sales cycles with new customers. And then we sort of establish that this pricing is solid. And then we roll it back to existing customers, or old legacy customers. And if you want to mitigate risk on this, you don't need to do it all at the same time. You can just break them into 4 parts. So if you have, let's say, 10 million ARR, you can just roll it back on 2.5 million. So if everything blows up, then at least you only had 2.5 million ARR at risk when you did that. And then you can sort of reassess and maybe change something when you do it for the remaining 7.5. And also it becomes much easier for customer success to handle it because they don't have to handle all the customers in the same 2 weeks. So this is also usually where you build the confidence from a management standpoint that, okay, we validated it, we sold it to new customers, like nobody killed us, this is great. We can roll it back to existing customers. We don't need to do it all at the same time. We can do it in tranches. And that usually is enough risk mitigation for people to actually get it done.
That makes sense. Really good. I think we're already at the end of time flew by very quickly. Maybe to wrap up, what are the 3 key takeaways? So for the audience, what do you think are the 3 things people should take away from this, our talk here?
So I think that the first key takeaway is just that if you haven't done pricing before, just know that the first time is the hardest, and then it just gets easier and easier. So it's like anything else, it's a skill. And once you do it sort of from an organization standpoint, it just becomes easier and there's a lot of value in it. So that's just the organization part. Sort of the how-to part, let's say there are 2 parts. One is don't price your product, price the customer. Just that concept in and of itself will help you get the right sort of mental framework to do that exercise. And then how you do it is you have these two toolboxes. One is the packaging and one is the pricing architecture. So one is the first, second, third class, find good packaging that really speaks to customer needs. And then the pricing metric is usually driven by pricing metric is what's going to get you there, and your ability to price different customers differently.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's all three.
That's all three. Let's say that's three.
Perfect. Really good wrap up. So let's go back to the slides. I think, yeah, first of all, thank you so much for this talk. Really, really insightful. And again, for the audience, if you want to know more, please read Ulrik's book or visit his website if you're interested in more detailed support. You can also reach out to us and we'll forward questions to Ulrik. So thank you so much. I think for us, just as a closing, so this was our second Buynomics.Talks webinar. The next one we'll have is one just for us, where we introduce it's actually a really new webinar on promotion optimization. So all fresh, super insightful. If you're interested, please sign up. And then in 2 weeks we'll have another Buynomics.Talk on psychology of pricing, also a really interesting topic. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to seeing you also in our next webinars. Ulrik, happy to have you again at some point. And if you're interested in our topics, also you can of course join as a listener. Otherwise, thank you so much for this great talk. Have a great weekend, and yeah, looking forward to our next exchange.
Thank you, and thank you to all for listening in.
Goodbye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.